We could bring in 3 junior engineers to handle the routine work, he said with a faint smirk, as if this were some kind of prudent efficiency. And in his voice slid that cold, clipped phrase, your salary, delivered in the flat-toned finance departments know all too well from final meetings where there's no room for pity, only the arithmetic of costs and gains. My name is Victor Hale. 60? No, 54. I'm the lead systems engineer of the Veltria residential complex. For 18 years, the building and the people inside it lived under the quiet guardianship of what I built. I raised its infrastructure almost from nothing, planned every run of wiring, every network expansion, every failover path, as though I were constructing a small city within a single building. And it all ran so smoothly, so invisibly, that the managers forgot there was a line between their quarterly reports and my sleepless nights, until the day they decided it was too expensive to keep me on the payroll. I was sitting across from Graham Vickers, the new CTO, brought in from the outside to modernize operations. 6 months in the company, around 42 years old, neat designer glasses on his nose, Cornell MBA on his resume. As it soon became clear, modernization for him mostly meant getting rid of the most experienced people. Diana from HR fiddled with a folder and, without lifting her eyes, recited from a chart that my severance was generous. 2 months' pay and compensation for unused vacation. I nodded, took the papers, quietly said, "Thank you," and asked one last time directly, "Is that all you want to say?" Graham looked at me almost disappointed, as if he had expected a storm, protest, maybe the threat of a lawsuit. He wanted something he could carry into the boardroom as evidence of drama. Maybe he thought I'd clench my fists or bargain for a counteroffer. Instead, I shrugged and said, "What exactly do you want me to say?" Then added, with the bitter candor you can allow yourself after so many years, "Most people in my position would have questions, doubts." Diana and Graham exchanged glances, unsettled by my calm. They mistook my silence for serenity, not realizing that I was already finished as an employee, and between calm and simple acceptance lies a chasm. "We'd appreciate your help during the transition," Graham continued. "The new engineering team will need guidance on the system architecture, maybe a few weeks of consulting." "I'll think about it," I said, knowing full well I wouldn't. We shook hands with restraint, and I walked out without a scene. 18 years of work packed neatly into one cardboard box. I waved to a few colleagues, men and women who, like me, had grown older beside these servers and racks, and saw them avert their eyes, because the same shadow hung over them too. On my way to the truck, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a short message from Alan, the database admin I'd hired 12 years ago. "Vic, the whole team is freaking out," he wrote in panic. I didn't reply immediately. At home, sitting on the terrace overlooking the calm sweep of Lake Ontario, slowly sipping bourbon, I watched the sunset paint the water in copper and fading years. Elaine laid a hand on my shoulder and asked softly, "So what will you do now?" I shrugged, a gesture simpler and clearer than words, and answered, "Something will come along." In that answer, there was both a cautious hope and the stubborn habit of a worker whose hands and mind always find something to do. In my chest burned that strange, gentle quiet that comes not from confidence, but from a sense of duty fulfilled. Behind me lay years of sleepless nights at the servers, greasy fingerprints on circuit boards, rows of half-drunk coffee cups, endless configuration tweaks, the small daily vows by which I had kept this place from sliding into chaos. Graham, with his charts and projects, probably never understood the weight of those simple commitments on which ordinary life depends, and he had no idea of just how much he didn't know. I had to find out for myself whether what I'd built all those years was just a machined shell, or if my work, my mind, my energy was still alive inside it. Truth was, the system didn't run only on servers and wires. It ran on my margin notes, half-finished scribbles and notebooks, long stretches of code I hammered out at 2 in the morning with no thought of documentation. The company never paid for a team to turn my drafts into neat manuals. Only I saw the whole picture, the hidden safeguards, the duplicate processes, The networks woven so tightly with redundancy, you couldn't tell where one thread began and another ended. No consultant would ever figure out, and I had no intention of explaining it to anyone. I remembered when I first came to Bayview Properties. Back then, the idea of a real information system sounded like a luxury for a small outfit with 4 buildings and a dozen employees. Their infrastructure was a couple of dusty desktops, a fax machine, and a rattling dial-up modem. Harold Bay, the owner, a straight-shooting, restless man, pulled me out of Syracuse, where I was doing consulting work, and told me, "We're going to expand. We need a foundation that can carry the future." That was the first brick in a long road. 18 years later, I'd turned that fragile stack of junk into a living, breathing ecosystem. It handled everything: tenant applications, background checks, automated repair tickets, rent collection across 4 states. I built it piece by piece, brick by brick, adapting it every time the company grew. It was a house no one could see, but it was solid enough to last. Then Harold retired. 5 years ago, his son Justin didn't care about what his father had built. He sold the company to an investment group, and Bayview vanished, reborn as Veltria Housing. They kept me because they were impressed by what I'd made. But the name wasn't the only thing that changed. The new bosses weren't interested in stability. They wanted numbers for the next quarter. Nothing else. The warning signs crept in slow. First, they killed my proposal for a documentation team. Too expensive, they said. We'll revisit it next quarter. But that quarter never came. Then the consultants showed up. Young, polished MBA fresh. They tossed around buzzwords, disrupting property management, cloud solutions, like this was a case study, not a living system. I tried to explain, showed them code, pointed out why their off-the-shelf platforms would wreck the architecture. Their eyes glazed over. They waited for me to stop talking so they could pitch the same damn idea again. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to planning meetings. Elaine saw it before I did. Over dinner, she told me, "They're pushing you out, Vic. You need to be ready." I laughed it off, poured another glass of wine. They need me. Nobody else knows how this thing holds together. She gave me a look I'll never forget. Sad, sharp. That's exactly the problem. 6 months later, they hired Graham Vickers. 42, neat haircut, designer glasses, Cornell MBA, resume full of big projects. He was rolled out as the man to modernize operations. I knew what that meant. Modernize meant squeeze the system for every penny this quarter and then gut the people who built it. He introduced himself like he was on stage. Banking experience, software background, a portfolio thick enough to impress the board. First thing out of his mouth was standardization, legacy systems, replacement. He brought in 3 junior engineers straight out of college. Nervous kids. They trail me around like puppies, filling notebooks, asking 100 questions. I answered, dry, patient, but I knew they were catching fragments, not the whole. The system wasn't diagrams and code snippets. It was compromises, backdoors, fragile balances that had taken me years to get right. I watched them staring at screens, pretending to understand. They didn't hear the system's pulse, didn't feel the strain under the surface. When things broke, it was those invisible shortcuts, the ones I'd threaded in on sleepless nights, that saved it. The kids couldn't see it. Neither could Graham. And I knew, sooner or later, it would cost them. Last week, Graham dropped by my office. Casual, almost offhand. Tomorrow morning, short meeting. Just the quarterly check-in. I should have known what was coming. Should have. But some part of me still believed they wouldn't pull the trigger. 2 weeks after they did, the phone rang. I was at home, in my study, editing my resume. A ridiculous exercise for someone who'd been the beating heart of a company for 2 decades. But the world demands paperwork. The screen lit up with his name, Graham Vickers. I let it go to voicemail. "Victor, this is Graham," the message began. "We've run into some issues with the tenant portal. The team is trying to sort it out, but they're having trouble with parts of your code and the system architecture. Could you give me a call back? Wouldn't take much of your time." I listened, deleted it, went back to the screen in front of me. But the calls didn't stop. 3 more that same day. Each voicemail a little louder, a little more desperate. Panic was bleeding through the polished tone. By evening, Alan texted me. Short, almost a shout. "Systems have been down all day. Tickets aren't processing. Graham's losing it. I read it, and a strange calm settled over me. It was exactly what I'd said would happen. I never wished collapse on the people who worked beside me. But the company? That was different. The next morning, HR called. Diana's voice, soft as honey. Victor, I hope you're doing well. I'm reaching out because we'd like to discuss the possibility of a short-term consulting arrangement, just to help the team through these current challenges. Of course, the compensation would be generous. I picked up, asked, how generous? A pause, then carefully, 300 an hour, minimum 4 hours. I smiled into the receiver. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table, staring out Lake Ontario. The morning was clear, glassy. Elaine set a cup of coffee in front of me. No questions, just a look that said she understood more than words could. She touched my hand, whispered, "What are you thinking?" I let the corner of my mouth lift, thinking they're finally about to find out what I'm worth. The calls didn't stop. 3 days straight. Graham, then Diana, then even Justin Bay, the heir who'd sold the company off but still sat on the board. The voices grew more strained each time. The tenant portal was dead. Maintenance scheduling had collapsed. Payment processing stalled out. Thousands of renters left without confirmation. Complaints piling up like smoke alarms going off in every room. I didn't answer a single one. On the 4th day, an email came through that changed everything. From Devlin Systems, Veltria's fast-moving regional rival. Not from HR, not a recruiter. From Lawrence Devlin himself, founder and CTO. Victor, I've heard about your situation with Veltria. We've been following your work for years. We're preparing a full overhaul of our property management infrastructure. I'd like to discuss opportunities with you directly. I read it twice. Something in me, the part that felt hollow since the day they pushed me out, sparked back to life. I replied on the spot. Meeting tomorrow. That night, Elaine and I cooked dinner. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic. The skillet crackled softly. Then the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands, opened the door. It was Graham. The man looked wrecked. His perfect suit wrinkled, tie off-center, those expensive glasses sliding down his nose. His face, usually cold and smug, was pale and worn. Victor, sorry to come unannounced, he started, his voice shaky but trying to sound official. We got an emergency. The whole system's down. Nothing works. My team can't figure it out. I leaned against the doorframe, let him talk. Sounds serious, I said. It is, he snapped. We need your help. The board has authorized me to offer significant compensation. 500 an hour. Whatever it takes. He spoke fast, afraid I'd slam the door in his face. I thought about the cardboard box still sitting in my garage. 18 years of my life boiled down to scraps they didn't dare throw away. I thought about his smirk that day, where he said 3 junior engineers could replace me. Nothing personal, just cost. I thought about how they killed the documentation team I begged for. I looked him in the eye, spoke quiet. Sorry for your troubles, Graham, but I've got an interview tomorrow. Something new, just like I figured. He froze. The look on his face, confusion giving way to humiliation, said more than words ever could. I shut the door. Back in the kitchen, Elaine was stirring sauce. The light was warm, the smell of dinner rich in the air. And for the first time in months, I felt like something in my life was finally turning the right way. For the first time since they cut me loose, I felt something I couldn't pin down with a word. Not joy, not the sweet burn of revenge, not even satisfaction. It was calm, a clarity sharp as glass, like the surface of a lake on an autumn morning. I realized I'd finally let it all go. The cardboard box in my garage, the endless hours in front of glowing monitors, the meetings that went nowhere, the promises to circle back next quarter. I wasn't part of them anymore, and that felt like freedom. I decided then I wasn't going to help them fix what they'd broken with their own hands. The meeting with Lawrence Devlin was better than I could have hoped. We chose a small cafe in downtown Rochester, neutral ground, far from the headquarters of either company. A place where the talk could stay honest, unclouded by shadows or listening walls. Devlin sat at a table by the window, stirring his coffee with a silver spoon. The kind of man who didn't waste words. I've followed your work for years, Victor, he said. No flattery, no ice. Just fact. That integrated system you built at Veltria. It's already legend in this business. No one else has come close. I nodded. Said simply, took a long time. That's exactly what I want to talk about. He leaned forward. We're building something new. Not from scratch. We don't have time for that. We need someone who understands architecture at the foundation. Someone who knows how to stitch layers together. Build a base that won't crack. Someone like you. I weighed his words. Let the silence stretch. We don't want to copy, he added, eyes glinting. We want better. I'm prepared to offer you chief systems architect. Full benefits. Stock options. Salary 20% higher than Veltria. Too good. Almost unreal. I let a smile slip. Why me? There are kids out there you could hire cheaper. Devlin laughed, low and sharp. You sound like your old boss. We tried that route. Hired 3 bright grads from the best schools. They built something slick, modern, and it collapsed the moment we passed 100 users. We don't need cheap, Victor. We need solid. The next day, I signed on. Meanwhile, Veltria kept drowning. Alan, good old Alan, sent me scraps of updates. Systems limping, critical modules still dead. Later, they hired a big-name recovery firm, charging a fortune. Nothing to show for it. A week after I started at Devlin Systems, my phone lit up with a familiar name. Graham. I almost killed the call, but something in me said, answer this one. Victor, please. His voice carried none of the arrogance I remembered. Just strain. It's getting bad. We've lost payment records for 3 months. Ritters are screaming about wrong charges. The consultants say they need your eyes on the database structure. I closed mine, took a breath. For a second, I saw it all again. Long nights over code, red eyes, scribbled diagrams I'd tucked away in drawers. I knew I could fix it. An hour, maybe 2, and the whole thing would breathe again. But I also knew the price of that hour. Graham, I said, steady. I'm working somewhere else now. That's not all. His voice dropped, heavy as stones hitting water. The logs show something else. Someone scrubbed access trails, tampered with authentication gateways. Processes were taken out in a sequence, on purpose, so backups wouldn't trigger. And Vic, we found traces from inside the corporate network, at the exact times the restores should have kicked in. That cut deeper than threats of lawsuits. Threats are cold math, but sabotage? Intentional failure? That twisted everything I'd built my career to prevent. I'd spent years guarding against sloppiness, against the cracks that ruin lives when rent payments vanish into the dark. And now someone had turned those cracks into weapons. You're saying this came from the inside? My voice was quiet, but I already knew. Alan slid a printout across the table. His hand shook. Timestamps match. Some IPs point to the consultant's offshore team. But others are ours. Veltria's own net. Someone dropped the shields on purpose, right when the system was at its weakest. That was why the board panicked, why the calls kept coming. Desperation pushes people to ugly places. Blaming me for sabotage wasn't just wrong, it was obscene. I'd spent my life building safeguards, and now someone was using the holes I begged them to fix as a crowbar. I scanned the logs. Checksums out of sync. Timestamps wiped. Blank trails in the middle of system calls, like pages torn from a script to keep the audience blind. My mind began forming a plan. Not revenge, not a return, just a way to put the data back, to give people their lives back. But Devlin's contract was clear, exclusive. I'd promised clean hands, a system built without ghosts. If I touched Veltria's mess, I'd betray the very principles that got me here. If I walked away, thousands of tenants would pay for management shortcuts. The air hummed with the old building's ventilation. Upstairs, someone laughed, unaware the floor below was splitting open. Finally, I said, quiet but firm, Alan, show me the full logs. And the sequence where the restore points got overwritten. I'm not promising to step in, but I can't look the other way if people are getting hurt. Alan exhaled, relief and shame tangled together. I'll bring everything, he said, already rising. When he left, the door clicked half shut behind him, and I sat alone with the thought that duty isn't written in contracts. Sometimes it's just knowing you're the last person anyone else can turn to. On the line, Graham breathed heavy. Finally, he spoke, voice stripped bare. The board's moving to take me out. They think I failed the strategy. If Westbrook pulls, I'm finished. I remembered his tailored confidence, his chess master stares through thin designer frames. Now his voice was just a man's, raw afraid. Graham, I said, you took the easy road. Thought it was about quarterly reports and shiny decks. But systems don't live in quarters. They live decades. Every choice gets written into them, from cutting documentation to ignoring the people who know what makes them breathe. This isn't revenge. It's just consequence. I hung up first. That night Elaine found me at the window, sitting in the dark, watching city lights ripple across the lake. She set a mug of tea down without a word and sat opposite. I told her about Graham's call, about the confession, about how his career would likely end with the company's fall. She listened, steady, then asked, "And do you feel relief?" I thought about it. No, it wasn't relief. It was more like watching a train wreck you'd predicted years ago, one no one believed was coming. And when it finally happens, there's no triumph, just the sour taste of inevitability. The next day, Alan brought more news. Westbrook Properties had officially cut ties. Losses for Veltria were catastrophic. The board called an emergency session. Graham was sidelined. "They're shopping for a savior," Alan said with a crooked grin. "Some big consulting name to calm the investors." But the investors already smell blood. Stocks down 20% in 2 days. I nodded. The end was writing itself. At Devlin Systems, the air was different. Lawrence moved steady, never flashy. No chasing the latest cloud gimmicks. He wanted reliability, transparency, the kind of foundation that lasts. I built a small team, Alan, a couple of old hands from Veltria, and a handful of younger engineers. We started shaping to think in systems, not just lines of code. We worked late, but it was a different kind of tired. Not the bone-deep fatigue of fighting clueless execs, but the ache of builders who know their work will stand. Some nights, shutting the laptop, I'd still feel that pull inside, like a piece of me was trapped in those years of code at Bayview Properties. But I knew now, what was broken hadn't failed for lack of craft. It was killed by greed, and no line of code could protect a company from people who treated it like scrap. I sipped cold tea and smiled. For the first time in months, I felt I was exactly where I belonged. Work swallowed me whole. Morning started before dawn. Coffee on the porch, reviewing diagrams, checking test results, mapping the day's battles. The hours flew. Meetings, debates, code, revisions, and every night we left the office not drained, but sharpened, knowing we were carving towards something real. The young engineers watched me close, the way I once watched the old guard at the start of my career. I taught them more than syntax or schematics. I taught them why you build for the user's future, why clarity matters, why systems should outlive their makers. They wrote it all down, stayed late to practice. I saw that spark in their eyes, the one that once drove me. Meanwhile, Veltria kept sinking. Alan forwarded trade articles, headlines screaming collapse, client losses, free fall stock. Graham Vickers' name dragged through every gutter column. I didn't gloat. It was never about gloating. It was about inevitability. 6 weeks in, I rode to New York for a sit-down with Jeffrey Westbrook and his board. They sat around a long mahogany table, faces carved by decades of deals and compromises. Jeffrey leaned in first. "Victor, we need someone we can trust, not just with a system, but with our future." Veltria proved they can't handle it. "Why are you sure Devlin can?" I met his eyes, breathed, and spoke, not about code or features, but about philosophy. About how systems aren't built on slideshows, but on understanding every layer, every dependency. About how we'd learn from Veltria's failures and build a skeleton that could carry weight for decades. When I finished, the room was quiet. Listening close, Jeffrey folded his hands. "I believe you, Victor. But hear this. If you fail, my company goes under with you." Then, I said, "Steady, we won't fail." The green light came fast. We worked near sleepless. Elaine barely saw me, except to bring dinner into my study, smiling softly as I bent over schematics. She knew. She knew this was one of those crucibles where life weighs what you're worth. In week 9, we ran our first major migration. The system held. A few errors, some rough edges, but the core stayed solid. That night, we all hit a corner bar, and I raised a glass for the first time in years. Told them I was proud. But the real test loomed, full Westbrook integration. Week 12, our point of no return. This time, everything rested not on the whims of a boardroom, but on the steel of our work. I felt in my bones. This wasn't about going back. This was about proving we could build something better. Jeffrey caught my eye at the end of that meeting, as if he could read the decision already etched in me. In that case, he said, we might not just save what's left, we might build something bigger. That evening, back home, I sat with Elaine on the porch. The lake wind carried autumn in it, and the sky burned with sunset. I told her Devlin was considering buying Veltria outright. She listened, then asked, and you? Ready to touch all that again. The people, the history. I watched the lake's fire-colored ripples. It's not going back, I said. It's forward. If the deal lands, we'll save the best of what was there. Not for them, for the people who believed in me and built beside me all those years. The 10th week passed in tense preparation for the first migration. We hammered the systems without rest. Load runs, failure simulations, recovery drills. The younger engineers walked around with red-rimmed eyes from lack of sleep, but no one complained. Everyone felt we were building something that would outlast us. The day came. We gathered in the operations hall, walls lined with screens, load graphs, data streams, server status lights. At 9 sharp, I gave the order to switch. The air thickened. Minutes dragged. First requests began to move through the new system, and we all held our breath. Errors? Failures? None. The graph stayed green. Data flowed steady. An hour in, Alan shouted, elated. We're clean. No lag, no crashes. The room erupted in applause. We had done it. I allowed myself only a short smile. This was just the first step. Ahead lay bigger regions, hundreds of thousands of records, thousands of tenants. But the foundation had held. The next day, Lawrence called me into the conference room. Jeffrey was there too. A thin folder sat on the table. We've made an offer to the investment firm, Lawrence said. Veltria will be ours within 2 months. I flipped through the documents, scanning numbers. The price was laughable compared to its valuation half a year ago. But behind every figure I saw people, teams barely holding on, the remnants of a system that still carried traces of my work. If we take on this integration, I said, we won't get a second chance. One mistake, and we drag both companies down. I know, Lawrence nodded. That's why it's you. I understood. The decision had already been made. The story I thought finished was coming back, not as a burden, but as a challenge. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a strange calm. The circle had closed, and now the key was in my hands. I remember the day we finished the last stage of migration, the way some remember the end of a long war. We sat in Veltria's old boardroom, now marked with a new nameplate, Devlin Integrated Command Center. Screens on the walls streamed metrics, uptime, throughput, request latency. All clean, stable, not a single failure. I turned to the team, ours now, together, Veltria and Devlin people sitting shoulder to shoulder, their tired faces glowing with quiet exhilaration. It wasn't applause for a victory, not a burst of emotion, but something steadier, relief and certainty. We had built it right. That evening, I lingered in the office alone. The server room was half emptied already. Old machines, once Veltria's pride, stood dark, waiting for disposal. I sat on a familiar metal chair, ran my hand over the cold chassis of a server that had once powered the first modules I wrote back in the Bayview Properties days. It all felt like a distant dream, but I could still see that moment, pressing the power button, holding my breath, waiting for the lights to blink on. Now everything was different. I was no longer the lone engineer who carried every line of code in his head like a private archive. Behind me stood a team, full documentation, people who knew the architecture as well as I did. That was my true victory, not proving I was irreplaceable, but making myself replaceable. A few days later, Lawrence gathered us in Devlin's new headquarters to close the year. The numbers spoke for themselves. Properties under management had tripled, profits had doubled, reputation soared. Trade journals were holding us up as an example. But what mattered most to me was simpler. Not one of my people had been cut for optimization. We kept everyone. We even grew. After the meeting, I stepped outside. The city buzzed, headlights glinting off glass facades. I called Elaine. "It's over," I said. I heard her smile through the line. "No, Victor, it's only beginning." I let her words sink in, and she was right. Veltria had been a part of my life. Heavy, luminous, both. But its ghost no longer trailed me. Now, I was building something new, with people who shared the same belief. That technology should serve people, not PowerPoints, not false economies. I looked up. The night sky was full of stars, the eastern wind carrying the scent of change. For the first time in years, I felt free.